Hello there and welcome to Asia One. I'm Tom Philpot. Now, a disturbing case from India has once again raised serious concerns over religious extremism, mob violence and the safety of members of the judiciary. Now, additional district and sessions judge Tabassum Khan, a Muslim judge serving in the central Indian state of Madhya Pradesh, has reportedly received death threats, rape threats and widespread online abuse after sentencing 14 men to life imprisonment for the 2022 lynching of a Muslim cattle trader. Now, the convicted men were found guilty of murder, attempted murder, rioting and other serious offences. According to the court, the victim, a 50-year-old named Nazir Ahmed, was transporting cattle when he and his companions were intercepted by a group of cow vigilantes. Armed with sticks and iron rods, the mob allegedly attacked the men on suspicion of cattle smuggling. Ahmed later died from his injuries, while two others survived and testified before the court. Well, Judge Khan described the incident as a clear case of mob lynching and handed out life sentences to all 14 accused. However, instead of focusing on the court's legal findings, attentions quickly shifted to the judge's religious identity. In the days following the verdict, the video circulated on social media in which Hindu nationalist influencers allegedly used communal slurs and issued death and rape threats against Judge Tabassum Khan. But some protesters claimed that the convicted men were being punished simply for protecting cows, an animal considered sacred by many Hindus. Now, right-wing groups also organised demonstrations in several states. During one protest, an effigy of the Judge Khan was reportedly burned, while others demanded the immediate release of the convicted men. Well, the case has drawn condemnation from India's legal community. The former Supreme Court Judge Makandi Kachu said the campaign sought to undermine the authority of the judiciary by targeting Judge Khan because of her Muslim identity rather than challenging her legal reasoning. Now, senior judicial bodies, including the Supreme Court of Bar Association, have warned that threats against judges endanger the rule of law and democracy itself. Well, police have registered criminal cases, arrested 2 suspects, and say investigations into online threats are continuing. Judge Khan has also provided police protection, while the Madhya Pradesh High Court has directed authorities to ensure her safety and identify those responsible. The incident has renewed debate over the influence of religious extremism and the continued problem of mob violence linked to cow vigilantism, where human rights organisations have over the years documented concerns about attacks on religious minorities, particularly Muslims, by extremist groups claiming to protect cows. As India continues to present itself as the world's largest democracy, this case has reignited questions about the protection of judicial independence, accountability for hate speech, and for security and equal treatment for minority communities under the law. Well, to discuss this in more detail, we're joined by Dr. Habib Siddiqui, an expert on Indian politics. Dr. Habib, hello and welcome to Perspectiva. So the judge has reportedly faced death threats and online abuses following this case. What does this incident now reveal about the challenges facing India's judicial system?
Well, as you know, Judge Tabassum Khan's case reveals something that is profoundly troubling about the state of India's judicial system today. When a judge delivers a lawful verdict in a mob lynching case and is met not with respect for due process, but with death threats, rape threats, and organized online violence abuse, it shows that the judiciary is being forced to operate under the shadow of intimidation. This is not simply a law and order problem. It is a crisis, as I see it, of democratic governance. As you'd recall, for more than a decade since Narendra Modi has come to power in India, anti-Muslim violence has been normalized. Mob lynching over cattle, assaults on Muslim traders, attacks on homes and businesses, and hate speeches have become disturbingly routine in Modi's India today. We have seen elected officials, in the name of cow protection, to garland convicted lynchers, extremist groups to defend rapists and killers. It is simply unacceptable. When leaders refuse to condemn such crimes, and in that case, what happens? Perpetrators think that, well, this is how things can happen. So they interpret that silence from the government officials from people like Modi as approval of their crimes. And when silence becomes policy, impunity becomes the culture. And that is what is happening in India today. That is the environment in which Judge Khan has delivered the verdict. And unfortunately, what we see is all these threats are coming against her. And it shows that how deeply the mob power has penetrated India's institutions. If judges fear for their lives, what good can come out of this kind of system, right? If the state does not defend its own judges, what message does that send to every government official tasked with protecting constitutional rights? India's judiciary has long been regarded as the final safeguard of democracy. But this incident shows that even then, that safeguard is under attack. The normalization of anti-Muslim violence has now reached the courtroom door, and it is simply unacceptable. It is no longer the minorities who feel unsafe, but it is the very institutions that are meant to protect them that are also unsafe. For India and for the world watching, the question is stark. Can a democracy survive when its own judges are threatened for doing their task?
Well, much of the criticism appears to have focused on the judge's Muslim identity rather than her legal reasoning. How concerning is this trend for judicial independence and the rule of law?
Well, it is deeply alarming, right? It reveals a dangerous trend in India today. The shift from contesting judgments to attacking judges themselves, especially when they belong to minority communities, like the Muslims. This is not criticism of jurisprudence. It is an assault on identity of the person who is ruling, who is judging. And once identity becomes the battleground, judicial independence is directly threatened. For more than a decade, since Narendra Modi has come to power, what we have seen is anti-Muslim violence has been steadily normalized. Mob lynching over cattle, attacks on Muslim traders, hate speeches, and discriminatory policies have become the norms in today's India. What has made the normalization possible is the consistent silence from the highest levels of leadership, from Narendra Modi down to anybody at the lower rung of the government or institutions. We have seen union ministers garlanding the very convicts of the crimes of hatred. And this is simply unheard of. But that has become normal in today's India because of the kind of Hindutwadi policy that has become the currency in India today. Silence becomes a complicity, and complicity becomes empowerment. And that's how the attackers, the perpetrators of crime, see themselves as. They see themselves as the protectors of Hinduism. And this climate now surrounds the judiciary. Judge Khan has delivered a lawful verdict after a full trial, yet her critics have framed her decision as a Muslim bias, as though a judge's religion automatically invalidates her ability to interpret the law. And that is profoundly dangerous. If judges are attacked not for their reasoning, but for their identity, minority judges become vulnerable, verdicts become politicized, and courts become targets of majoritarian pressure. Judicial independence cannot survive in an environment where mobs feel entitled to threaten judges. Period.
Well, counter-vigilantism has been linked to several incidents of mob violence in recent years. Why does this issue continue to persist despite repeated court interventions and existing laws?
How vigilantism persists in India despite court interventions and existing laws because the problem is not legal. It goes beyond that. It has become political, social, and institutional. The first reason, as I said, is political signaling, because what is happening today is like people from Modi down to lower level leaders, they are silent when these kind of crimes are happening, and they are even rewarding or garlanding the very culprits that commit those kind of crimes. So the absence of moral leadership emboldens vigilance, and that's what we are seeing today. Then comes the police behavior. Police behavior often reinforces impunity. In many cases, police have arrived very late. They have filed very weak charges, and even they have arrested victims rather than the very perpetrators, the attackers. Investigations have stalled, witnesses have been intimidated, and trials have been dragging on for years. When perpetrators see that the system bends in their favor, they act again. The third thing is the majoritarian narratives that have framed violence as a virtue. Because here comes the social media as an ecosystem glorifying violence against Muslims or anybody in the name of cow vigilantism or whatever. And this ideological justification transforms ordinary criminals into self-styled guardians of the nation, of the Hindu faith. And once violence is moralized, it becomes repeatable. Finally, the normalization of anti-Muslim crimes over the past decade has created a climate where attacks on Muslims, whether over cattle, food, dress, or prayer, are seen as routine. This normalization is the most dangerous shift. It means society is no longer shocked, it is desensitized. And that is a great, great danger. So cow vigilantism, as I see it, persists not because courts have failed, but because political silence, social approval, and institutional weakness have created a culture of impunity. Until that culture changes, the violence will continue, regardless of how many laws exist and who is giving the verdict.
Human rights groups have expressed concern about the safety of religious minorities, particularly Muslims. How does this case fit into the broader discussion about minority rights within India?
Well, it fits, very well in the sense that safety and dignity of the Muslims are definitely threatened. And when the threats against Judge Tabassum Khan, it's not an isolated issue. It's not an isolated eruption of anger. These are part of a very larger portion in which anti-Muslim hostility has been normalized. Human rights groups have repeatedly shown that Muslims face disproportionate violence, discriminatory policies, even the policing has been unfair, and they have been targets of hate speeches. For more than 10 years, since Narendra Modi has come to power, India has witnessed a steady rise in mob violence, especially against the Muslims. And what we have seen is a consistent silence from top leadership. When Prime Minister does not condemn lynching, when ministers garland convicted killers, when extremist groups celebrate violence as cow protection, it sends a very powerful signal. Crimes against Muslims are politically acceptable, they're tolerable. That silence shapes the very public discourse, the behavior, the police response, and social attitude. Judge Khan's case reveals how this normalization now threatens the rule of law. Instead of debating her legal reasoning, critics are attacking her for her identity as a Muslim. That is a direct assault on judicial independence. When a judge's religion becomes grounds for intimidation, minority judges become vulnerable, and verdicts become politicized, and courts themselves become targets of majoritarian pressure. So this case is not just about one judge or one verdict. It is a window into the broader erosion of minority rights in India, an environment where Muslims face rising insecurity, where extremist narratives dominate public discourse, where even the judiciary is not insulated from communal hostility. Protecting minority rights now require protecting that very institution that is supposed to uphold them.
Well, social media played a significant role in spreading threats and inflammatory content after the verdict. Are the authorities doing enough to curb online hate speech and incitement to violence?
What we are seeing is really a serious problem. Okay, the authorities must do more than what they are doing today. Because what we are seeing is a judge has been threatened with death, rape, and the kind of communal slurs that are loved, these are simply unacceptable. So this is not a spontaneous anger. It is a digital ecosystem primed for incitement. The core problem is that authorities are not doing nearly enough. Okay. For more than a decade, as I said, Narendra Modi has been a silent spectator, not somebody who says that, okay, enough is enough. Let's stop all this hatred online or offline against the Muslims. Hate speech circulates freely in India. Violent rumors spread unchecked, and extremist groups use social media to mobilize mobs in real time. Yet enforcement remains very weak. Platforms are really pressured to remove inflammatory content quickly. Police seldom act against the issuing threats unless the case becomes nationally embarrassing. And crucially, the political leadership has never made online hate a priority. The failure is not accidental, as I see it. It is structural. And that's where something has to happen. Narendra Modi must come out loud and clear, condemning such violences against the Muslims and religious minorities. His silence, unfortunately, is sending message that hate speech is not only tolerated, but politically useful. In such an environment, online abuse becomes an extension of online impunity. The threats against Judge Khan show how dangerous this has become. Social media is now a tool for intimidating the judges, influencing the public opinion, and undermining the rule of law. Until authorities treat online hate speech as a serious national security issue, not a political inconvenience, unfortunately, extremists will continue to use digital platforms to incite violence, silence minorities, and threaten the very institution meant to uphold justice.
So India's legal bodies have condemned the threats against the judge and called for stronger action. What additional measures should be taken to ensure the judges can perform their duties without intimidation?
Several things should be done. Okay, because when a judge is threatened with death and rape for delivering a lawful verdict, it exposes a deep vulnerability in India's judicial system. Judges cannot uphold constitution if they feel threatened. So the question is, what more must be done? I can recommend a few things. Starting with, for example, there must be immediate and mandatory security protocols for judges handling such communal mob violence cases. And it should not be an after fact, but before the fact. So as soon as these kind of cases are being filed and then a particular judge or magistrate is supposed to rule on it, okay, they must have those kind of security that does not, hamper their livelihood, security, their family security, and all that safety. Okay. Second, the law enforcement must treat those kind of threats as serious criminal offenses, not just an online noise. They must go out and shut those, extremist groups, the forums online. They must issue FIR inquiries and arrest them and proceed with the prosecutions. The message must be unmistakable. Intimidating a judge is an attack on the state itself, on the government itself. Okay. The third thing is political leadership must speak out clearly and loudly without any kind of equivocation. As I have said, Modi has not done anything to really curb violence against Muslims and religious minorities, and he must speak loudly that such kind of things will not be protected. So protecting judges require reversing that signal he has been sending and his party has been sending. So these are unacceptable. Fourthly, that social media platforms must be compelled to cooperate. Threats against judges should trigger immediate takedowns, account suspension, and data sharing with investigators. Digital impunity fuels real-world violence, and we have seen it over and over again, not only in India, but also in many parts of the world, especially in Myanmar and a lot of other places. Finally, the judiciary itself needs institutional safeguards, from fast-track courts for cases involving intimidation to internal mechanisms that allow judges to report threats without fear of reprisal or political interference.
Well, some observers argue that extremist groups have become more influential in public discourse, while others disagree with that assessment. Based on the available evidence, how do you assess the role of religious extremism in contemporary India?
The role of religious extremism in India is no longer a matter of speculation. It is all visible in public discourse, in political behavior, and in the normalization of anti-Muslim hostility and violence over the last couple of decades. Since Narendra Modi has come to power, extremist narratives have become steadily normalized. They are no longer in the margins, they have become mainstream. What used to be fringe rhetoric is now part of everyday political conversation, discourse, which is amplified by social media. It is legitimized by silence from top leadership and reinforced by selective law enforcement. And we see this in the rise, and that's why we see rise of cow-vigilant violence and a lot of other problems, including, for example, the fact that ministers, union minister garlanding convicts. So what message does it send? That, okay, you can go ahead and do whatever you like when it comes to Muslim minority, and the system is going to protect you. This is a wrong kind of message. It sends a clear sign that extremist thinking has penetrated public discourse deeply enough to challenge institutions themselves. And that's why we are not really surprised to see that Tabassum Khan's religious identity is now in question, not her legal reasoning. And this is not a healthy sign of any kind of, jurisprudence or any kind of state as to how it is heading. At the same level, it is important to note that all segments of Indian society are, however, not supporting this kind of trend. There are a lot of good people, civil society groups that condemn such kind of violence, but their voices are unfortunately drowned by the louder, more organized extremist networks that dominate online spaces and influence political narrative. Remember, in Modi's India, as a result of crony capitalism, most of the powerful networks, media networks, the TV channels are owned by people that have benefited from this connection with the BJP, the Adani group, and all those people. I mean, this is unbelievable, you know. So the available evidence shows that religious extremism today plays a structural role in shaping public discourse. It shapes how minorities are portrayed, how violence is justified, how institutions, including judiciary, are pressured, when extremist groups feel empowered to threaten judges, intimidate minorities, and police public behavior. It signals a shift from democratic debate to majoritarian coercion. So based on the evidences, what I see is religious extremism is not just influential in India, it is reshaping India's political and social behavior and landscape. And that is a bad, bad sign.
And looking ahead, what reforms or policy measures would help strengthen the rule of law and protect judicial independence and ensure the safety and equal rights of all citizens?
As I see it, the threats against Judge Tabassum Khan have exposed how fragile India is when it comes to its various institutions. The first and the most urgent reform is political leadership. The political leadership, starting with Narendra Modi, must understand that silence is not okay, because that kind of silence has consequences. It signals to extremist groups that their actions, anti-Muslim violence, cow vigilantism, are tolerated. It signals to police that enforcement is optional, it is not necessary, or it is a must. And it signals to the minorities then that their safety is negotiable. India cannot strengthen the rule of law unless its leaders publicly condemn violence, defend justice, and make it clear that intimidation of judges is unacceptable. Secondly, India needs institutional protection for judges. Any judge handling communal violence should automatically receive security, not after the threat go viral, but from the very beginning when the case has begun. Threats against the judges must trigger immediate FIRs, arrests, and prosecution. Judicial independence cannot survive if judges themselves feel threatened. Thirdly, the police reform is essential. Law enforcement must be insulated from political pressure. But what is happening today in India, it is totally different. Police is either silent or sometimes even cooperating with the very attackers. And that is unacceptable. Witness protection program must also be strengthened so that the cases do not collapse under the fear of intimidation. Fourthly, India must confront online extremism. Social media platforms must be required to remove hate speeches and threats against judges within hours, not weeks or months. Coordinated networks that incite violence must be dismantled through cyber, forensic, and legal actions. Digital impunity fuels the real-world violence. And finally, India needs a renewed commitment to constitutional equality. Today, Indian Muslims and other religious minorities don't feel that they belong to India, that they're equal in dignity or other kind of rights. And that is totally unacceptable. And this is not, how India has started. India has given a promise of equality, dignity, and these kind of rights are nowadays being obliterated. They're threatened. So strengthening the rule of law is not just about courts. It is about political will, institutional courage, and societal commitment. Protecting judges like Tabassum Khan is protecting India's democratic failure. And lastly, what I want to say is to our audience is the world is watching. So India simply cannot assume that nobody's watching them. At the largest democracy with 1.42 billion people, people are watching as to how India performs. And the choice is theirs to make, whether they reward a system that produces extremism or they want something different, a world of pluralism, diversity, where people are respected despite their religious differences.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.